I knew the media could be interested in what I did when I first entered the public eye 12 years ago. At that moment, I understood that they would unavoidably concentrate on our personal and public lives. You wanted to see it, but why? Evidence indicates she was in the vehicle. Evidence of her injuries. Pictures of her on the back seat of the car, half dead. There are still unanswered concerns about what actually transpired inside that deadly accident even decades after the terrible night that Princess Diana died. What investigators actually discovered has now come to light in alarming disclosures. Furthermore, the specifics are much more tragic than anyone could have ever guessed. The enigma is further complicated by this finding, which also reopens previously unhealed wounds. What, though, had been concealed for so long? And why is it only now becoming apparent? Everything we believe to be true is altered by the truth. Fate was sealed with the final right decisions. Princess Diana's last night was a night of decisions rather than fate. Decisions that, looking back, turned into tragic strands. The Ritz Hotel in Paris was supposed to be a sanctuary on August 30, 1997. But the pressure outside its doors grew as dusk became to midnight. In order to get any glimpse of Diana and Dottie fading, throngs of paparazzi had assembled. Cameras primed, engines running. The events that followed were not the result of pure luck, but rather of a series of choices that determined their doom. Plans were cancelled at the start of the evening. It was planned that Diana and Dottie would eat out. But the crowd of cameras outside the Ritz prevented that from happening. They sought quiet in the hotel's imperial suite to avoid another circus of the media. But there were murmurs even there. The institution had been uneasy due to whispers of a love story and rumors of an engagement. The idea of another altercation was unbearable to Dottie. They came up with a new scheme. Escape into the Paris night in silence, away from the cameras. Urgency, not caution, was the driving force behind this tactic. They called in a backup Mercedes 280 instead of their primary vehicle and its usual driver. Henry Paul, the hotel's deputy head of security, was at the wheel. Already, this was out of the ordinary. Although Paul was not assigned as their driver, the choice was made hastily, possibly too hastily, and the evening had its own momentum. Decoy cars were set up from the Ritz's front entrance to distract the waiting paparazzi. Bodyguard Trevor Rhys-Jones and the actual carrying Diana Dottie Paul escaped out the back door. The ruse appeared to have some chance of success. Freedom was short-lived, though, as the Mercedes slid into the streets, headlights piercing the Parisian radiance. The photographers were quickly duped. Scooters swerved into pursuit, engines roared to life, and the chase started in a matter of seconds. There must have been anxiety in the Mercedes as it raced down the Seine. Diana was once again a prisoner of flashing bulbs, an unrelenting chase after being plagued by the press for a long time. The car rushed onward toward the Pont l'Alma tunnel, rather than turning for the safety of Dot's neighboring residents. The choice would turn out to be disastrous. The tunnel's blinding lights and steep turns were well known. Nevertheless, the Mercedes rushed in, eager to dislodge its assailants. Control was gone in a matter of seconds. In a single violent moment, lives were destroyed when the automobile veered and collided with the 13th pillar. Henry Paul and Dottie died at once. With terrible wounds, Rhys-Jones fought for his life. Diana was still breathing despite her severe injuries. However, there wasn't much time left. Every action that night, in retrospect, begs the question, why not hire a professional driver instead of Henry Paul? Why forsake the safest path? And instead of using patience and prudence, why risk using decoys and secrecy? To learn more, continue watching. He came. He carried out his responsibilities as best he could. Then he was told that Diana had to be taken out of the cars. A drunk scapegoat or something more serious. Henry Paul? Seek a face when tragedy strikes. That look in the wake of Princess Diana's tragedy was that of the driver, Henry Paul. According to official reports, he was intoxicated, careless, and unfit to drive. Henry Paul was no stranger to the Ritz Hotel, but from the very beginning, contradictions surfaced, making the public wonder, was Henry Paul truly responsible, or was he made the perfect scapegoat? Staff knew and respected him as the deputy head of security, a man who maintained his cool under duress. Around 7:00 p.m. on August 30, 1997, he concluded his shift and vanished for about 3 hours. It's unclear where he traveled during that time. Some claim he was just relaxing or off duty. Others think the secret to everything that transpired lies in those hours that were lost. Paul was abruptly summoned back to the hotel at 10 o'clock. He became the focal point of Dodi Fett's escape strategy in a matter of minutes, setting up vehicles, educating employees, and finally getting into the driver's seat of the Mercedes that would transport Diana. His manner was remarkable during those hours. He was shown smiling, strolling easily, and even bending to tie his shoes, with great balance in the surveillance footage taken inside the Ritz. He spoke to Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana's bodyguard, and laughed with coworkers without appearing drunk. However, the toxicological result presented a completely different picture. Henry Paul's blood alcohol content was over 3 times the legal limit, according to French officials. If accurate, it indicated that he was intoxicated enough to be a risky driver. No one around him noticed the issue. Later, Rees-Jones testified that Paul seemed totally sober. Employees that interacted with him that evening characterized him as calm, sharp, and self-assured. There were none of the usual indicators of intoxication. No hazy eyes, no slurred words, no wobbly movements. Observers found this disparity strange, if not concerning. How could a man who was so obviously sober test as being intoxicated? Some claim that the tests had been manipulated or mismanaged. Before Paul ever got into the automobile, some people questioned whether he had been drugged or poisoned. When Paul's distraught parents met with former police head Lord Stevens, who oversaw the British investigation years later, the contradictions only became worse. The meeting's notes show something shocking. They need not worry, Stevens assured them. They wouldn't find their kid operating the car while intoxicated. However, his formal report stated otherwise when it was made public. Paul was guilty and inebriated. Critics questioned, was this a matter of comforting parents in private, or had the narrative been altered somewhere between investigation and publication? The abrupt change was accompanied by additional levels of intrigue due to Henry Paul's background. He reportedly had ties to French intelligence and served as an informant in security issues involving hotels. Was he just a helpful hotel worker? Or were his connections more profound? Was he specifically targeted to play a role that evening, whether he knew it or not? If he was a member of intellectual circles, the mysterious compounds that were purportedly discovered in his system were equally concerning. Traces of prescription medications and alcohol pointed to a concoction that should have left him noticeably inebriated. Witnesses, however, swore otherwise. Were the toxicological samples altered, tampered with, or contaminated? The official record is shadowed by the possibility. Unquestionably, Henry Paul was selected at the last minute to lead one of the world's most photographed women into one of the riskiest chases of her life. Why didn't anyone notice if he was intoxicated? Why did the reports claim that he was sober? What actually pushed him into that tunnel, if he was something else torn between obligation, concealment, and invisible forces? Henry Paul passed away immediately after the Mercedes collided into the column. He was unable to defend himself, provide an explanation for the hours that were lost, or elucidate the events leading up to the collision. There was a void left by that stillness, and suspicion soon filled it. But was he a disposable pawn in a much bigger scheme? Or was he the careless antagonist of this tale? And perhaps another player has the solution if he wasn't the entire story. A car that was gone as fast as it had come. An automobile that shouldn't exist is the Phantom Fiat. Investigators anticipated finding broken glass, twisted metal, and dispersed possessions when they searched through the Mercedes wreckage in the Pondelmo tunnel. However, they found something in the wreckage that left more questions than it resolved. Traces of a different vehicle. There were pieces of white paint stuck to the black Mercedes's body, fragments of a taillight. Additionally, red plastic that wasn't part of the premium car was found. There was no escaping the conclusion. Just before the collision, Diana's Mercedes had collided with another vehicle. The evidence indicated a white Fiat Uno, a modest, unassuming car, basic, everyday, and ostensibly inappropriate in one of the most notorious mishaps in history. However, as the car was never formally located, this finding sparked a fresh mystery. Thousands of cars that fit the description were inspected by French police as part of their extensive search. However, no Fiat Uno was ever absolutely connected to that evening. This was seen by some as evidence of incapacity. Others thought it was a cover-up. How could a vehicle that may have contributed to the collision itself and left behind tangible evidence just disappear? Theories started to circulate. Some said that a random bystander, scared into silence by the mayhem, was the one who drove the Fiat. Others said it was intentional, pushing or obstructing the Mercedes just enough to cause it to go out of control. One man's name came up again and again. French photographer James Anderson is well known for his fixation on Diana. A white Fiat Uno belonged to him. In the weeks before her death, he had followed her. He was also said to have boasted about being close to the tunnel that evening in some quarters. According to reports, his Fiat was discovered years later, with a replaced tail light, a detail that uncannily matched the pieces found at the scene of the collision. However, the plot becomes even more sinister. Anderson was discovered dead in a burned-out automobile in the countryside of France in 2000. He had set alight inside the car, according to authorities, who declared it a suicide. But the situation was strange. No lighter was ever found. The site, a distant spot far from his home, made no sense, and his body was nearly completely destroyed. Many people still believe that his death was orchestrated to quiet him rather than being self-inflicted. Anderson's connection was eventually rejected by official investigations, including Britain's Operation Page. They contended that there was no evidence that he had been in Paris that evening. But there are still questions. Who was the driver of the Fiat if not Anderson? And why did no one ever find it? This piece of the puzzle is weighed down by the unsolved questions. The fatal result of speed, drink, and bad luck has been cited as the cause of the crash. However, the Fiat Uno adds a degree of ambiguity and a tangible presence that implies external intervention. The reason Henry Paul lost control so quickly could be explained if the Mercedes clipped or swerved to avoid the smaller vehicle. It might indicate something much darker if the Fiat purposefully obstructed their way. The stillness is the most disturbing. There was never a single driver. The automobile was not positively identified by any eyewitness. Nevertheless, the tangible evidence left behind demonstrates its existence. A spectral car that was removed from the official file. Was the onlooker innocent? The dark design's missing component? Or even related to Diana's personal connections? Let's investigate. Ring whispers and pregnancy speculations joined the sadness in the days following the disaster. Was Princess Diana about to announce a marriage, a new chapter in her life, or possibly a child? The notion unsettled the elite and excited tabloids, and it all depended on two potent symbols: the potential for pregnancy and a ring. Daudigfed went to a fancy jeweler in Paris a few hours prior to that fateful night. Dismomui was the revealing name of the collection he took with him, a basic yet attractive gold band. Say yes. It was not the type of item that was bought carelessly. The ring was delivered to the Ritz in a stealthy manner, put in a box, and fastened. According to reports, Diana had seen and even appreciated the brochure. This was more than just a token of love to many. It was a ring for an engagement. The ring was still in the hotel safe, unaltered, when the crash occurred. However, its significance expanded into something more significant in the aftermath. Was Dottie planning to pop the question that evening? Was Diana about to say yes? It was a lovely tale that was abruptly cut off for fans. Skeptics saw it as a story exaggerated by conspiracy and sadness. Then there were rumors that she was pregnant. Diana was photographed in swimwear during the holidays, her body closely examined for indications of alteration. According to several acquaintances, she was beaming and radiant, and she even made a suggestion that she would soon reveal some very important news. Muhammad Ali, Dot's father, emerged as the most vocal supporter of these allegations. He maintained that a marriage was on the horizon and that Diana was expecting his grandchild. This wasn't conjecture to him. There was no doubt about that, and he believed that was precisely the reason the establishment wanted her removed. However, science provided a different account. Following the collision, blood testing showed no signs of pregnancy. Diana had been using contraceptive pills, according to her medical documents. Even though she was very close to Dottie, several of her closest friends later testified that she had not made any serious plans to get married or raise a family at such a young age. Nevertheless, the rumors persisted. The story was sustained by the symbolism of the ring, which was still sealed in its box. Furthermore, the notion that a Muslim guy could have fathered a child with ties to the British throne fueled speculation that Diana's romance had veered into perilous political ground. Was it a danger to the monarchy? Or was it love? The ambiguity in this part of the story is what makes it so eerie. They bought a ring, but they never gave it. There were rumors of a pregnancy, but no proof. A developing connection was cut off before it could fully develop. Rumor, mistrust, and terror flooded into the ambiguity created by the unresolved questions. Was Diana going to start again and move away from the shadow of the monarchy? Or did the public, in search of purpose, misinterpret the romantic gestures of marriage and motherhood as nothing more than illusions? Stalked by predators, paparazzi, or lenses? The first people on the scene the night Diana's car hit the pillar weren't firefighters, paramedics, or police. They took pictures. As if it were a movie set, their flashing lamps illuminated the tunnel, revealing the most vulnerable moments of a woman who had been stalked and loved all of her life. However, did the paparazzi pose a greater threat, or were they just opportunists? Diana had been talking about feeling hunted for years, calling the media a pack of wolves. That metaphor took on a terrible form on her last night. The Mercedes was being followed by throngs of motorcyclists and scooters, which were swerving between vehicles and blinding the driver with flashes of light. According to witnesses, some claimed they weren't just looking for photos, they were purposefully putting the automobile in danger, enclosing it, applying pressure, and making sure it couldn't leave. It presents an eerie possibility. Did these photographers have a story in mind, or did they participate in a well-planned operation? A number of theories surfaced. According to one, some paparazzi weren't even operating on their own. Rather, they were following orders and getting paid for pressure as well as pictures, which may cause disorder on the road and lead to the catastrophe that others had previously planned. According to a different theory, there was a member of the media ring who had military experience and was able to blend in among the photographers while carrying out a more sinister purpose while hiding in the turmoil. However, there is an even stranger viewpoint. Could it be that Diana was never supposed to be photographed alive? Some others think the pursuit was more about surveillance than photos. Long lenses and powerful cameras may do more than just take pictures. In short bursts, they can assess distances, collect details, and even blind drivers. Was the goal of this chase to make sure the Mercedes never left the tunnel unharmed? Or was it mostly about making tabloid headlines? Suspicion is only increased by what transpired following the collision. Several photographers reportedly positioned themselves around the wreck and took pictures of Diana as she lay seriously injured rather than racing to aid. This constituted egregious insensitivity on the eyes of the public. To theorists, however, it appeared to be documentation, evidence of completion, and not a coincidence. Even stranger, the majority of those pictures were never found. Numerous items were seized, some disappeared, and some were allegedly sold for enormous prices to private collections. Why and by whom were they purchased? Were they imprisoned because they disclosed information that contradicted the official narrative, or because they were too graphic? Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana's bodyguard and the only survivor, subsequently implied that the photographers weren't merely bystanders. He thought their presence interfered with rescue attempts, introducing ambiguity when it was most required. What if, however, it was the purpose? The last thing someone arranging her death would want is prompt, unhindered medical assistance if she could have been spared in those initial few minutes. There has never been a more hazy distinction between participation and bystander. Were the paparazzi merely vultures preying on tragedy, or were they pawns in a far bigger scheme? Furthermore, Diana wasn't simply being pursued, if even one of them was more than just a photographer. She found herself in a corner. Who stood to benefit from Diana's quiet, though, if the mayhem was more than a coincidence? Don't blink, because the answers that are kept in the courtroom will lead to discrepancies, inquests, leaks, and even more sinister questions. Once Paris was resolved, the fight for the truth shifted to the courtroom. What ought to have been a simple investigation into Diana and Dottie's deaths swiftly turned into a tale of hold-ups, inconsistencies, and rumors of top-level meddling. Years passed before a significant inquest was conducted. This lapse was so extensive that it raised questions. Was it a conscious attempt to allow memories to fade and evidence to deteriorate, or was bureaucracy dragging its feet? Some insiders said that documents disappeared before hearings even started, while others said that important witnesses were subtly dissuaded from testifying. The reliability of toxicological testing, Diana's mysterious surveillance, tainted evidence, and if spy services had followed her whereabouts were among the startling points brought up when the hearings eventually began. However, jurors' testimony and what the public witnessed did not always coincide. Important testimony appeared to disappear into sealed archives. Declarations were condensed rather than read in their entirety, and files were censored. Diana herself made one of the most disturbing disclosures. She expressed her anxiety of a planned collision in her car in a letter she penned years prior to the collision. They were nearly prophetic words. However, rather than being viewed as possible proof of premeditation, the letter was viewed in court as little more than an angry outpouring. Why minimize something so eerie? The way Henry Paul's toxicity was handled was another peculiarity. Although there was dispute among experts over the results, these conflicts were frequently reported as settled when they weren't. According to one opinion, it's even possible that identical blood samples were switched to create the appearance of a drunk driver in order to cleanly wrap up the case. Subsequently, there were leaks, bits of testimony, confidential correspondence, and incomplete reports that made their way into the media before being formally revealed. Diana was portrayed as paranoid by some. Others portrayed Paul as careless, but their actions were all intended to cloud the issue and divert attention from unresolved issues. Why and who was leaking? Either to control the narrative or to educate the audience. The coroner's continual rotation was possibly the most perplexing. A succession of judges and officials resigned, blaming inexperience, pressure, or health problems. Critics perceived it as a revolving door intended to delay the revelation of the truth. Every modification resulted in further hold-ups, interrupted continuity, and heightened suspicion. Clarity was the goal of the inquest. Rather, it made the fog thicker. The proceedings fundamentally exposed a glaring discrepancy. The system appeared to be set up to evade the truth, despite the public's desire for it. Was this deliberate design or incompetence? There was no doubt about that. The questions simply got louder, regardless of what the courts decided. And there was another darkness beneath those inquiries. Secret meetings, rumors of intelligence services, and intentions more darker than the public record dared to imply. The murder allegations and MI6 motivations, rumors of an accident, quickly evolved into accusations of conspiracy within hours of the collision. There was just one claim at the heart of those rumors. Diana's death was no accident. Who had the authority to plan such a scheme, And had she been silenced? The British spy agencies were the center of attention. Diana has alluded to being observed for years. Friends remembered her talking about faces that appeared to follow her across continents, cars parked outside her home for hours, and odd clicks on her phone line. While some brushed these off as paranoia, others paid attention to what she said. MI6 was the only organization with the means to keep tabs on her every action. Why would she be the target of intelligence? There are numerous theories. Some claim it was her relationship with Dodi Fayed, a member of one of the world's wealthiest Muslim families. Some people believed that Diana, the future king's mother, would become unstable if she married into that background. Others think her activism was the true threat she posed. By the middle of the 1990s, Diana had established herself as a strong advocate against international arms trafficking and landmines. Governments were afraid she may change foreign policy with a single speech because of her immense power. Could it be that she was upending billion-dollar industries? Then, there's the more sinister allegation that a former MI6 officer's description of a training exercise was uncannily similar to the tunnel catastrophe. He claimed that British intelligence had once thought about a high-speed tunnel accident as a means of getting rid of a problematic individual. Official investigations disregarded the eerie likeness as a coincidence. The theories that the driver, Andrew Paul, was more than just a hotel security manager are even more conjectural. According to some stories, he might have been providing British and French intelligence with information. If so, was he put up to bear the blame or coerced into driving that evening? The unexplained abnormalities of the crash, the lost Fiat Uno, the malfunctioning cameras, and the lightning-fast tunnel reopening are all contributing to the fire. Just each anomaly may be explained. When combined, they create the illusion of convenience, as if someone intended for the mayhem to mask the reality. And there is still one terrifying possibility at the center of it all. Diana's death might not have been an accident, but rather a quick, clean, and eternally shadowed operation if it was thought that she was too independent, too vocal, and too dangerous to established forces. Regardless of their validity, these theories capture a single reality: the idea that intelligence services may have known much more than they ever acknowledged is inextricably linked to the tale of Diana's death. What they did and did not find inside the wreck. Investigators weren't merely cataloging wreckage when they eventually managed to pry into the Mercedes's mangled shell. They sought clarification. Decades of skepticism have been stoked by what they discovered and, more significantly, what they didn't find. A few stray pearls, pieces of jewelry, and blood traces, later utilized for testing, were among the wreckage. Items Diana rarely lacked, however, were strangely missing. She was rumored to be carrying letters, her handbag, and her private journal. Were they discreetly taken out before the action was ever captured on camera? Or were they lost in the confusion? The mystery was heightened by the vehicle itself. Mechanical examinations revealed no issues with the steering, tires, or brakes. The Mercedes looked good on paper. However, a former mechanic subsequently asserted that the car had a history of instability from an earlier collision. If so, why was a car like that put into service for a woman who was always in danger? Was it carelessness or a component of a larger scheme? The tunnel itself was even more frightening. Crucial cameras facing the collision location were not operational, even though it was a key Parisian route. No video of the collision, no image of the enigmatic Fiat Uno, just empty gaps. The tunnel was cleaned, reopened, and traffic resumed in a matter of hours. The wreck contained fragments of the story, but its silences spoke out louder, as though deleting the night's events was more important than keeping the truth intact. In that tube, more than just metal was twisted. It was the account of the actual events. Final thoughts. The remains of the Pontalma tunnel continue to loom large over history nearly 30 years later. The official narrative describes tragedy, chance, and speed, but the questions remain unresolved. Why are things missing? Why is there no video? By the fact that witnesses who ought to have stepped forward remain silent. Diana's passing was more than just the passing of a cherished princess. It was the breakdown of confidence in organizations that were supposed to inform and protect. Was it a result of fate or engineering? Was she the victim of political annoyance, unrelenting media attention, or both? Her own voice is the one that sticks out the most. She was warned that she will die in an accident. These concerns loom over the case like a prophecy realized, regardless of whether they were intuition or foresight. Thus, the incident continues to be both a tragedy and a mystery. The world might never be able to solve it. Diana's legacy lives on, even though her narrative may never be completely resolved. What do you think actually occurred that evening? Comment below.